the spotlight is on women as we celebrate Women's Month. And we've seen that Dr. Shefali Tsabary is a clinical psychologist who's received her doctorate from Columbia University in New York. And she specializes in the integration of Eastern philosophy and Western psychology, and is a keynote speaker who presents at conferences and even workshops all around the world. Now, as we commemorate the importance of Women's Month right here in South Africa, I sat down with Dr. Shefali Tsabary, a three-time best-selling author and mom, who offers some insights about the shifting dynamics between men and women and what women empowerment truly looks like.
Dr. Shefali, thank you for joining us here on Weekend Dawn. It's an absolute pleasure. I know that COVID-19 has us doing things a little bit different, so thank you for making time to chat with us today. I think I just want to start off by looking at the changing dynamics that's happening the world over. I mean, we've seen the fall of traditions, gender norms, and narratives are literally being redefined. Ultimately, the dynamics between men and women, I mean, how would you define what that looks like presently?
Well, to define it presently, you have to understand it historically a little bit. And I think ever since the advent of the agricultural revolution, which spawned this ownership of land by man, women then got put in that category of owning. And that mentality of men thinking that they are in ownership of land, children, cattle, and women leads to a misogyny that is very hard to shake off. Yes, men are stronger physically, but in the pre-agricultural time, there was more of a communal, tribal mentality where matrilineal heritages also were powerful and present. And I think women had a greater, more important status in society. But as we became more patriarchal and owning land and then becoming more capitalistic and becoming more segregated into nuclear families, women began to lose that status. And that's what we're seeing right now, is women do not even function as humans, leave alone as equal. And it's still going on in the world today. You know where you are, in Turkey, what's happening, in India, where I was born. And even here, the Me Too movement here has only now risen to the fore. But so many women live in daily fear and subservience because they're under this mantle of ownership and possession. And marriage doesn't make it any better. And all the institutions of religion and the way we are raised don't make it better. So this is what we're seeing, and this is a psychologically disturbing tragedy that needs to be shaken out of.
Yeah, so I mean, people are obviously embracing this new norm. They're open to finding alternatives, and we're looking at how women empowerment is being redefined through narratives at large. How would you say that is being redefined towards a more positive approach?
Well, women are realizing that there is a union in our being victimized by the predatorial nature and possessive nature of the male as he stands. And now every man is not evil, and every man is not a misogynist, but there's a prevalent patriarchy that is subjugating and denigrating of women, just like there's a white supremacy that exists all over the world. So we have to acknowledge first what is the problem. And there are two main scourges of our current culture. One is white supremacy and one is male patriarchy. And I'm not talking about men being in charge, men being leaders, great. But patriarchy means it's a hierarchical linearity, which by definition implies an oppression. And that's what we're seeing in the world today. So to change that narrative, we have to first acknowledge the problem. We have to say there is racism in the world, and I'm possibly a co-creator or co-participant of that, whoever you are. And then, yes, we live in a highly patriarchal, oppressive world that is subjugating of women. And how am I co-creating or co-participating in that narrative? First, we have to acknowledge what the problem is, outline it. Second, you have to ask about your own participation. How am I perpetuating this tragedy? And what then, the third step is, what can I do to change the narrative? And that includes two steps. One is personally changing it in our own lives, meaning being very conscious of the narrative to our own selves and to our sons and daughters. And the second part is daily activism. How can I show up in a different way and spread education and spread literacy around these two very, racism and sexism are the two main problems. Racism comes from white supremacy. Sexism comes from an unbidden, undying patriarchy. And these mantles need to be crumbled if we are to truly make changes. And women need to hold the torch. We need to be on the vanguard of this change, because why would the people in power ever want to change? They never want to change. It's the oppressed that need to rise. And the only way we can rise is through our sororal sisterhood, where we come together as one. You see, we women have for too long pitted ourselves against each other. And this needs to stop. And this is what the Me Too movement is doing, and what we're doing, standing in solidarity and sisterhood with this tragedy in Turkey, where there's femicide on a daily basis, so to speak. So as we women realize that this is happening to all of us, we are not living in a glass castle, then we will bind together, join together, unionize together, and we will rise and say no more.
Actually, you touched on a point that I wanted to bring up about the role of women empowering other women, practically on a day-to-day basis. What does that literally look like? It's easy to say stand in solidarity. It's easy to post from afar, when you're in the comfort of your own home. But what does that look like to ultimately not only stand in solidarity, but implement the change that we seek?
Yeah, well, first it starts on a very micro level, where we have to stop subjugating ourselves. You see, we have inherited the patriarchal voices. Now we cannot accept ourselves either. We denigrate ourselves. We want to look like that ideal skinny white girl on the screen. And even the white girl can't look like that, because she's been Botoxed and Photoshopped. So everyone is living under this oppression of some ideal. And this is how we pit against each other and pit against ourselves. We are living under this plague of perfectionism. We are oppressed by our looks, by our skinnydom, or not, our achievements, our wifedom, our motherhood. These roles are binding us, and we are defining ourselves by these external elements. And only when we step into our own worth and stop trying to look 10 years younger and be who we're not, stop trying to contour ourselves into people pleasers, stop being afraid of the word no and conflict, when we start making bold changes in our own lives where we listen to our own voice, only then, after that micro level is managed, will we pass this on to our children. And then we will allow the uprising of other women. Till then, if we are judgmental of ourselves on a daily basis, it is going to come out toward our daughters and towards our sisters. It's only when we release perfectionism and oppression within our own lives, when we applaud our own sovereignty, will we applaud that in our sisters. Until then, we will be intimidated by other women who are strong. We will want to put them down. We will compete with them and compare. And this is how we sisters pit against each other.
Yeah, I've been following some of your posts on social media, and you've literally, started to create a new standard of women. You also speak about the roles of in relation to daughters and mothers, and ultimately what daughters need from their mothers. How would you contextualize and encompass that which you're trying to promote?
Yeah, daughters need their mothers to be comfortable with their own skin and in their own being. Daughters need their mothers to stop constantly craving, clinging, striving for the approval and validation of others on the outside. Daughters need their mothers to embody their imperfections and their cellulite and their wrinkles and ease the pressure they put on themselves so that this trickles down to them. And daughters yearn for a voice, but they can only have a voice to the extent we mothers allow them to, and to the extent we allow ourselves to. We do nobody any service by being people pleasers. I think that time for that woman, that servile, quiet, docile peacemaker, that time has come to an end.
Yeah. I'm just looking at, Women's Month, as I mentioned, is being celebrated in South Africa. and the significance of what our forebearers have done to hand over the torch, the baton, and obviously empower us to start a new revolution, and forge our own paths during these unprecedented times we find ourselves in. But, also globally, there is a sacred feminine shift that's also occurring. I want to know from you, what is your favorite thing about being a woman?
My favorite thing is that I get to nurture. I get to be very connected. This is part of our DNA as women. We have the capacity biologically to birth, to lactate, to feed our offspring. And what that does to our psychology is that it reminds us that we are really nurturing. We are the earth. We are the space that can contain. And that's a beautiful quality that I think is unique to us women. And as long as we allow ourselves to stay in power with it and don't capitulate and give up our sense of self to the point of over-giving, over-nurturing everyone around us except us, we actually have the power to nourish the earth and create a revolution.
All right, Dr. Shefali, I'm going to wrap up the chat perhaps just by looking at one of the future prospects that you have in the works coming up. I've seen quite a few posts on social media, but during COVID-19, how have you been inspired perhaps to start, restructuring and relooking your modus operandi? What can we expect from you in the near future?
Yeah, I'm constantly teaching. I teach meditation online. I train coaches to become conscious parenting coaches. So if people are interested, they can join my institute. It's just about spreading consciousness and using the online platform, adapting constantly, not staying stuck, asking yourself, how can I shape shift? I think that's what we women are really good at. And COVID-19 is offering us a very unique challenge to step out of our comfort zone and show up in a new way.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us here on Weekend Dawn. Thank you very much for being part of this narrative, rewriting the narratives. And we're sending you lots of love from a very cold and wintry South Africa all the way to New York. Thank you, Dr. Shefali.
Thank you.
Well, that was an absolute pleasure chatting to Dr. Shefali Tsabary, a clinical psychologist, 3-time best-selling author. Again, just chatting to us about women empowerment, what it means, and also as we culminate and commemorate Women's Month here in South Africa.